Tilting in games is extremely common. So much so that you've almost certainly experienced it yourself many times. And if somehow you are simply an enlightened being who doesn't get upset when playing games ever, you've definitely seen other people experiencing it. Tilt is when a game makes us feel frustrated and angry to the point where we start playing worse. The logical and analytical parts of our brain seem to disappear as we become a steaming locomotive of emotion fueled only by rage and salt. When you're playing Monopoly and you seem to land on your brother's properties over and over while he somehow weaves through yours consistently and you get upset and quit. This is tilt. When you're playing Mario Kart and you've held first place the entire race just for a blue shell to hit you on the last lap, which lets your little sister win and you get upset and quit. This is also tilt. When you're playing a game of Magic the Gathering and all you need is to draw literally any spell from your deck and you'll win the game, but then you go on some twisted mana bender where you only see lands for the next 10 turns, and this makes you get upset and quit. That is also tilt. Now these are 3 random examples that are certainly not drawn from the life experiences of anyone making this video, but they do start to paint a picture of when and why we tilt. As you may be unsurprised to learn, tilting in Magic the Gathering happens all the time. Tilting can act as an impassable roadblock in your game where it brings you to a dead stop on your path to progress and improvement. It can even keep you from recognizing what is wrong with your game. Imagine for a moment a set of scales. On the left side of the scales, we have bad variance. This is when you get mana flooded or screwed. Then on the right side, we have good variance. This is when you get lucky and you draw that one-of card at the exact right moment, and that saves an otherwise lost game. Now imagine that next to these scales, we have all of your mistakes and all of your good plays. When we are accurately assessing our gameplay and skill, this is how the scales should look, perfectly balanced, as all things should be. What frequently happens with Magic players, however, is that they attribute their mistakes to bad variance, and they attribute their good variance to skill. Anytime my opponent wins, they were lucky. Anytime I win, I simply outmaneuvered them in a game of pure skill. You can see how as we shift our perception around like this, it gives us a skewed view of our own luck, and makes us think that we genuinely have worse variance than others. If this is your perception of your gameplay, then why would you work on anything? What could you even seriously work on? You're just less fortunate than your opponents. Well, believe it or not, we can actually utilize this tilt in ways that help us learn and grow as Magic players. But to understand that, we first need to quickly talk about how our brains work. There's something in psychology known as the conscious competence learning model. This model suggests that there are 4 stages to learning anything. First is unconscious incompetence. You are unaware of the things you don't know. This is where you were before you ever even started to learn Magic, but maybe you knew enough about it that you knew it was a card game. Followed by this stage is conscious incompetence. This is where you start to be aware of how much you don't know about something you're learning. When you knew the basic rules to Magic, but you knew there were tons of niche interactions and cards that you didn't know, this is where you were. After that, we have conscious competence. This is when you have learned about something, but you do have to consciously think about it to execute what you've learned. Maybe you learned that you should generally wait to cast your spells until your second main phase, but you have to remind yourself of this during your games. Finally, we arrive at unconscious competence. This is when you know something to the point where it is automatic. When you're at the point where you play your spells at the ideal time without having to even think about it, you have mastered that facet of the game to a point of unconscious competence. On top of these 4 stages of learning, we also have 3 levels of thought processes in our brains. The first level is our automatic functions. Breathing, maintaining heart rate, and unconscious competence all live within this level of thinking. At level 2, we have our emotional responses, which yes, includes tilt. Finally, at level 3, we have our higher level thinking. All of our logic and reasoning lives here, as does our conscious competence. The interesting and ultimately useful thing about this is that when we have a strong emotional response in level 2 of our brain, it starts to shut off level 3 entirely. This means we are left with only our emotions and our automatic functions. And this is how we can start to utilize our own tilt for good. It can actually be kind of hard to identify what skills you've mastered and what skills you need to keep working on. Have you really mastered mana sequencing to the point of unconscious competence, or do you think about it more than you realize in your games? This is where we can leverage these side effects of tilting to our advantage. Let's say you notice that every game that you get tilted in, you start to mis-sequence your lands, or maybe you start to miss some important triggers. What does that tell us? Well, as we learned earlier, when we tilt, our conscious competence gets shut off, and we are left to rely solely on our unconscious competence. So we can reasonably conclude that any mistake we make dramatically more frequently when tilting is one that we have not mastered to the point of unconscious competence. This is invaluable information that we can leverage to help steer us in our practice and testing as we strive for improvement in this game. We can basically weaponize our own tilt against ourselves and wield it like a torch, illuminating the weakest aspects of our play. Conversely, it can also be something of an affirming pick-me-up when we analyze our tilt and realize that there are mistakes we are not making, even when tilted. It can be hard to measure and recognize growth within this game, so tools like these are extremely helpful for keeping us motivated and on track. A great first step in utilizing your tilt is keeping a tilt journal. All you have to do is keep a log of how you felt mentally after a match and include any observations you are able to make about mistakes you made while you were tilting, or mistakes you specifically didn't make while tilting. Magic players love to keep all sorts of data regarding their gameplay. Win rates, mulligan decisions, play draw, matchups, sideboard guides and decisions. They seem to generally track just about everything that isn't their mental game, which seems like such an obvious weak link to me when the mental game is such a large part of this game. Analyzing your tilt like this is also a good way to begin overcoming your tilt. As you observe it more and more, you can start to identify the warning signs that commonly cause you to tilt. Once you have these identified, you can start to see the patterns in real time, and simply being aware of them can decrease their ability to affect you. So there you have it. Even though tilting is definitely not useful while you are experiencing it, it can actually be a very handy tool in your toolbox for identifying what areas of your game need improvement. Many of the ideas for this video I got from reading The Mental Game of Poker by Jared Tindler, so if you want any additional information, I highly suggest checking that out. But that is it for the end of this video. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you especially to everyone who supports me on Patreon, which makes these videos a lot easier to pull off. Speaking of Patreon, there's also a free article that accompanies this video if reading is more your thing, which I will include a link to in the description below, and members of my Patreon get access to these videos and those articles before everyone else. That's it. Thank you. Bye. LOL, lots of love.